And we're back. Me and Falconeer back at it again.
I've written a letter to my sister.
I don't know if this is an authentic Egyptian accent.
You need to keep everything
God.
secret.
And the irony is that if there's any accent to be that Hollywood should be getting right within the Arabic world, it's Egyptian. Do you know about Egyptian TV?
Thank you.
No.
So, okay. Arabic is one of those languages that is how do I put this?
I know this because some have
Wait.
tried.
They were
Stung. In their minds, they say.
They tried to go to Agartha, and the bee stung their minds.
And caused brain damage. From what from implications.
I want to be here with
No. Just
to serve them tea.
All right,
I mean, I guess mind pain.
As long as there is tea.
Anyway,
who knows?
Egyptian TV.
Anyway, Egyptian TV.
Friends, but no fruit.
Dates.
No dates.
Okay, so I keep getting derailed. That's a nice. That's a nice visual effect. I think it would be better executed today, but because it's just a decal, but it's nice. Okay, God, I keep getting derailed. It's been a long week. I'm a bit distracted. Okay, so Egyptian TV. Arabic is one of those languages that's a language spectrum instead of a single language or several related languages. Like if you start
Chinese?
Yeah, exactly, actually. Like in China, you can start in central China-ish and then go to the south coast. And by the time you reach the south coast, you will have hit the point where you'll have changed languages several times, but at no point will you have hit a point where neighboring villages don't understand each other perfectly well. And Arabic is like that, except one end is in Morocco and the other end is in Iraq. Egypt is right in the center. It's on the Nile, which means it has a connection to the sea and has a lot of trade going on there. And its accent is about as neutral as you can find in the Arabic world. So that is where that's where the Egyptian Arabic radio often gets recorded and broadcast. That's where the closest thing they have to a movie industry which is an actual movie industry. They're not a big one. And Egypt has a colossal TV industry. They produce TV shows that show in most of the Arabic world and in places outside of it where Arabic's still spoken, like immigrant communities. If you go to a one of those like regional bookstores or something and see DVDs with Arabic on them, there's a very, very good chance that's an Egyptian TV show. So if they were to try and get that accent authentic, which is unlikely that they'd bother, that's like the one Arabic accent that they stumble onto, whether they knew it or not.
Okay.
So that's Egyptian.
Okay. So I got a bunch more questions about Judaism for you.
Yeah, go ahead.
To fill the time. My first question is something I've been wondering about. In Christianity, there is this unfortunate tendency towards biblical literalism.
Yeah.
Is that a thing in Judaism, or are you all smart enough to realize that the Torah is...
Well, okay, one thing to understand about Jewish theology is that no one agrees on everything in Jewish theology. It's kind of the point. So I can't say all of us believe anything, because somewhere out there's some obscure sect or iconoclast who would tell me off for speaking for him or her. Or them, I guess. Though, actually, yeah, there are plenty of non-binary Jews out there. But, yeah. So, that said, apparently biblical literalism was common in the days of, the early Christianity. But it hasn't been a thing since then. Especially as, the diaspora set in, and we have to start interpreting things in the Bible anyway, just to get by for the reasons we talked about last time. So you end up with we're disinclined to look at this stuff literally, especially because we emphasize a personal relationship with God in many ways, but it's a community relationship with God, not like a community of believers, but the community itself has a relationship with God. And that puts something above, like, that means the whole community has to be able to extrapolate things, I guess. I'm having trouble putting this into words, right? But long story short,
there has to be a consensus, you're saying?
Yeah, there has to be a consensus, not a broad consensus, but like I think I mentioned the minion. M-I-N-Y-A-N, even though it's, spelled in Hebrew.
I'm familiar with the word. I heard the word before, but
it's 10 believers, traditionally 10 Jewish males.
Oh, right, it's the quorum.
Yeah,
there have to be 10 believers in a single place. Conservative Jews say they have to all be male. Reformed Jews say no, they can be any gender or no gender, I guess, depending on how reform you are.
Yeah, I mean, look, I can go into the 5 major branches of Judaism, at least 6, and how complicated that is at a later date. But that's its own story. But yeah, it's long story short. Biblical literalism is the sort of thing that you get when people don't dissent and don't argue about ideas, and that's something that Jews are specifically not supposed to do. So it
is literally in your religion. We have to argue about this.
Kind of, but pretty much. Like
I mean, you have to interpret the law, and since your religion kind of doesn't have a temple anymore, that specifically means Judaism as a religion, I guess, is technically post-apocalyptic.
Yeah, I never. That's fair. That's actually a fair way of putting it, though. It's post-apocalyptic in the way of a lot of settings are, in that it doesn't really matter to most modern people, even though it has very much influenced the way that they think and live. So, like, it's not the Mad Max of religions. It's the Final Fantasy X. So let's put it like that. Except Final Fantasy X is way darker than Judaism is. Let me put it that way.
I'm not a Final Fantasy guy, so that's just going over my head. I'm sorry.
Final Fantasy X is about... Okay, yeah, the more I think about it, the less appropriate it is, because while it is a post-apocalyptic setting, it's also about a gigantic metastasized death cult. So...
Well, Judaism has had a couple of those, but they're all gone now.
I mean, almost every religion has. Some of them are still around. But... So yeah, we don't like biblical literalism. Is something that is not particularly wise. It's viewed as...
technically you can't be biblically literate. You don't have a temple anymore.
Yeah. Honestly, like I said, you can't say any single statement about Jewish identity without a Jew stepping forward to tell you you're wrong and how. But there are, like, okay. So you mentioned, actually, this great segue. There are 5 major branches of Judaism. A lot of people have heard of Orthodox and Reform, which are the socially conservative and socially progressive-ish groups. But okay, let me go. One is humanist Jews, and humanist Jews are Jews who are also atheists, or at least agnostic. They're entirely in it for the culture, the shared history, the ethnicity, the community, in that end of the spectrum. After that,
okay.
And that tends to blow a lot of Christian minds, because the idea of they see Judaism as a religion and as a personal religion, because that's kind of what Christianity is. And so the idea of a member of a religion who isn't religious in that religion is strange.
Well, Judaism is both a religion and an ethnicity.
Yeah, it's a religion and a set of ethnicities and a culture and a set of languages. It's a coalition of things that an individual belief is important, but it's part of a larger whole. Like, you don't... I can't say too much about Christian salvation, but I can say that according to Talmudic law and Talmudic interpretation, it is Judgment Day will go for everybody. but the requirements for a non-Jew to be judged positively and join with God before the end of the world are substantially lower than they are for Jews. Like, you have to...
Because they're not burdened with the law.
Not really. Basically, there's something called the 7 Noahide laws. It's supposedly because they all apply to the descendants of Noah. And it's an abbreviated version of the Ten Commandments. Don't take the Lord's name in vain still. Don't swear. Don't cheat. Not swear, but like swear.
I should mention, I fucked this section up like 5 times before figuring out what you're supposed to do. They made everyone here really powerful and infinitely spawning. There's actually a trick to this. So, and there's a level 50 guy you can't kill walking around the area, a huge golem.
Good.
Golem, appropriate for Judaism.
Hey,
okay,
we'll get to that later.
Okay.
Where the hell were we?
You were talking about the Noahic laws.
Yeah,
that apply to non-Jews.
Yeah. It's like don't cheat, don't steal, don't kill, don't be a pervert. That's one of them. What that means exactly is defined, and the only one that isn't just like kind of what you'd expect is that you have to solve your disputes in court instead of through like violence or through some other means, like the sort of disputes that you'd expect to be solved. And if you do that, you get to join. Like, we don't really have a concept of heaven. I think I mentioned this before. And we don't have a concept, like, I can't say what exactly, again, because I'm not familiar, Christians think is going to happen during Judgment Day. But the idea during Judgment Day in Judaism is God takes every soul and judges them, depending on how they lived in life and what happened. If they are found wanting, the souls are destroyed and just kind of obliterated. It's not a painful experience, it's just non-existence. If they are judged well, they then become a part of God. You become one with divinity. And after that, Judaism doesn't really have much to say, because if you won't be around to care, or you'll already know what comes next. It's just completely irrelevant. But yeah, in order to...
I am, in my head, the moment you said that, I am already concocting 10 fantasy settings where... Like, that's so different from the Christian view that I'm sitting here like, why has no fantasy setting done that, to my knowledge?
I mean, sort of, technically, actually the Elder Scrolls have. That's an aspect of Chim, if you've heard the word.
I've heard of Chim, but I'm not familiar with you becoming one with God.
Oh, I actually, the only subreddit I post on a lot is the Elder Scrolls subreddit, lore subreddit. I can go on about Chim and the nature of the Elder Scrolls world forever, but let's save that for when we run out of material again. So
okay.
Yeah, so that's there's, like I said, Judaism is very communal. Ultimately, there's plenty of room for individuals in it, but there's a very strong communal. There's a communal basis that just doesn't seem to be present in like these individual salvation religions, stuff like most other forms of monotheism. And
do you think that's a result of its origins?
I think that's a result of those individualism favoring religions being very easy to proselytize. It's very easy to relate to somebody, to convince someone to. It's much easier to convince a person to convert than an entire community. Usually. So.
Okay, I can see that. I was thinking it was more Judaism being founded by nomadic desert dwellers.
Sort of. I mean, honestly, depending on who you ask, we may or may not have been nomadic. Like, I don't want to go into that too far, because that's not actually something I have a particularly good grasp on. But
okay. Anyway, we got off track.
So off track.
We were talking about the six main line beliefs of Jews. We had humanists,
the minimum of
conservative.
5, and probably at least twice that. But okay, we were at humanists. We have Reconstructionist Jews who are looser in their beliefs, but they are still usually religious. Like, you get, it's not unknown. Instead of like humanist Jews don't often fully participate in the communal aspect as much as the sort of cultural aspect. And
so you're not going to see them at the synagogue?
Sometimes it depends. It's one of, but you aren't going to get you're almost certainly not going to see a humanist synagogue. You might, however, see a humanist Jew at a Reconstructionist synagogue, because Reconstructionism is basically any sort of socially liberal, progressive Jews coming together. There's not. That's where my family is Reconstructionist, and it's not unknown for Reconstructionist rabbis to be agnostic. It's it puts a very strong emphasis on a sort of flexibility of belief that there is definitely belief is an important part, but it isn't the only defining part. But it is an important part as opposed to humanist Judaism. Then there's Reform Judaism.
Do you mind if I tell a joke about Judaism that I have that is not offensive?
Let's hear it.
It relates to the differences. Okay. How can you tell you're at an Orthodox wedding?
Oh, I think I know this one. If the rabbi's wife is pregnant.
Yes. How can you tell you're at a Reform wedding?
If the rabbi's pregnant.
Correct. Yes.
How do you tell? How do you tell you're at a conservative wedding? It's the bride is pregnant. And how do you tell that?
Okay.
And how do you tell you're at a Reconstructionist wedding? It's the rabbi and her wife are both pregnant. So, like, Reform is middle of the road social progressive Judaism. It's the Reconstructionism is still like it's since it's so it's still ultimately pretty individualist for Judaism. Reform Judaism is mainstream. It keeps that sort of progressive tint while still being very communal and not particularly revolutionary anymore. Like when it was founded, it was extremely revolutionary, but these days it's just it's the sort of Reform.
I'm vaguely familiar with that. Wasn't Reform the first one to say, "Hey, maybe we should integrate"?
Kinda
into.
It was the.
I'm vaguely familiar with it.
It's.
But
that's another thing that I'm not too clear on, and that it's just there was a lot of complicated in late 1800s, complicated theological and social and political arguments around what the Jewish people should be doing as a group. I just don't know. But so then you get conservative Judaism, which is conservative. It is the moderate Republican voter brand of Judaism. They're basically
your dad of Judaism.
Kinda, yeah. They're not. They do tend to move with the times sometimes, but they're always slow about it deliberately. And honestly, I'm struggling to say nice things and be fair because I've had bad experiences with conservative synagogues before. Because there's often a kind of really boring conformist tint to them, where they'll just they have expectations of people, and that takes precedence over what people actually believe or want to believe or think. But yeah, I'm not going to get too big. Oh, look at that, Orochi! Imagine. Anyway, where was I? Right. Okay, and then Orthodox Judaism is it's instead of like just conservatism, it's intentionally trying to be traditional. It is following, like even conservative Judaism discards the parts of the Talmud that doesn't like. But Orthodox Judaism tends to follow it very closely as much as possible. And they do tend, of the 5 major groupings, they're the only ones who wear the peyot, which are those little forelocks. They don't. In most branches of Judaism, it's either the whole don't do any work on the Sabbath, and by work we mean don't cook or flip light switches, which both count. under traditional interpretations. You won't get that. You'll get that ignored for the most part in Reform and Reconstructionists, and Humanists don't care usually. In conservative congregations, at least in my experience, you are strongly encouraged to do it and judged if you don't, but you're not considered. It's not actually considered religious obligation. In most Orthodox congregations, it is, and they have a negative reputation.
Discriminatory?
They have it's one of those things where they have a negative reputation in Judaism, in most other branches of Judaism, for a variety of reasons. But they're
let's wait for a second.
Oh, is this the one?
This is the most bullshit puzzle.
I love this. If this is the puzzle I think it is, I love it. It's terrible and I love it. You
have to know an obscure Edgar Allan
Yes.
Poe story. Use the cipher from that story on his thing, and it's just bullshit.
I love it.
I literally have to look it up because I have no idea what the fuck they're talking about, and there's no hint.
I remember that there is a hint, but it's really oblique. But this is one of
Goldbug.
Yeah, this is one of the
Goldbug has modern connotations, so you have no idea what you're talking about. It's just bullshit.
Yeah, it is.
Anyway,
but when it comes to this game, one of the things I used to say, how is it different in structure from another MMO? I will say one major puzzle involves hacking someone's computer by identifying the code, and in order to identify the code, you have to identify one character's favorite Edgar Allan Poe novel based on sparse clues within the game, or Googling it, and reverse engineer the cipher in that and use that to access the computer. And this is all something you do yourself, with the idea that this is something that encourages research and thought outside of just standard MMO. Figure out the combat, even though this particular puzzle is a lot dumber than it sounds. But yeah, it's I love it. It's terrible. I love it. But so yeah. Actually, okay.
Okay, we're back. We had some technical difficulties, but we were discussing the 5 or 6 main sects of Judaism.
Right.
We just gone over Orthodoxy.
Now, okay. So the fun thing about Orthodoxy is that just about every other group of Judaism has divisions within it. Whether it's Humanist Judaism, where the division is literally every person there, or Reconstructionists, where every synagogue is different, or Reform, where everyone's bland, or Conservative, where everyone's actually trying to be the same. You also have Hasidic groups, and they're not just followers of the Talmud. They also usually branch from various sages over, usually from early 1900s to late 1700s ish, and they are weird. They often live in their own communities. They often have their own bizarre beliefs. There are very few. They live a lot. There are a lot of we call them. I'm trying to be nice, though I don't particularly want to, because these guys are. A lot of them are anti-vaxxers, particularly militant anti-vaxxers. And a lot of them live in small communities in rural New York that are really dictatorial and not great to people within them. So
yeah, I've heard about these guys.
Yeah, so and it's not.
I once got called anti-Semitic online for saying I was not a fan of them.
Yeah, I mean,
and it's it's not because they're Jewish; it's because they're religious fundamentalists. I don't like any of those people.
Yeah, that's one of those things that is just I feel qualified to talk about Jews, but I'm not sure I'm qualified to talk about Hasids. So,
we've had a couple Hasids on Something Awful talk about their experiences.
Yeah, and it's
people who've manage to get out of that life.
Yeah,
And
it's very prone to actual, like, not the sort of thing that people think cults are, but actual cults.
yeah.
Because a lot of Hasidic groups literally formed as cults in the modern sense around various theologians. And I'm sure there are plenty of people who would be very angry at me for saying this, but whatever.
Blue team, green
I
team.
don't care.
You're all the same.
So yeah, and by the way, fun fact, Mediterranean CH. You might be able to hear the sort of, in how I'm pronouncing that H. That is a letter that, that's a sound that does not appear in English, but does appear in Hebrew. And, yeah, we'll pull the trigger and just, yeah, I'll just walk back and, walk back, say thank you, can I have another? It's, but yeah, anyway. Okay, so, yeah, I don't really, I'm
Well,
not going to talk about
if you don't,
anymore.
okay, well, if you don't want to talk about it, what you said 6, that's 5.
Well, there's also, 6 is kind of an honorary position. There are several traditional Jewish communities that don't fall into that spectrum. Like, all of those branches come from Ashkenazi Judaism, and that's Jews. Those are Jews who are descended from German Jews. Ashkenaz is an old term for Germany, and I come, like, I'm 3/4 Ashkenazi, 1/4 Scots Irish, but we come from everywhere from Germany to Poland to Ukraine, a few parts of Southern Europe to a lot of Russia, and especially the Baltic countries.
So what do the Sephardim have then?
These days, most of them participate in one of the groups because they're theological rather than ethnic branches or anything. But all 5 of those movements more or less formed out of the Ashkenazi consensus. And there's also, I'm thinking, have you heard of the Good Samaritan? The old parable.
Yeah, I'm familiar with it.
Do you know what a Samaritan is?
I believe they were the Jews who did not flee during the diaspora.
Well, sort of. There are several dissident groups of. When I say dissident groups, I mean these were dissident groups thousands of years ago, who did not follow mainstream Judaism in various reasons and for various reasons in various ways. And the Samaritans are still around. There's a few thousand, but they're still Jews, but there are a lot of Jews who don't consider them Jews because their beliefs are recognizable. It's still pretty different. And you have several others.
Do you have
so on and so forth.
Do you have an example?
Well, other than the Samaritans, or
how the Samaritans' beliefs are different.
First of all, it is for most forms of Judaism, it is possible. The conversion process is deliberately. It's not that it's vague or hard, but it takes a while. It involves a lot of rituals. It involves 3 separate times going before courts of rabbis to argue with them while they try to discourage you, and not like violently or madly or anything. But their point is, ideally they are supposed to debate you logically debate you, and you are supposed to be able to convince them through your grasp of theology and through your personal conviction that you really do want to stick around. And that is not something that even other Jews can do when it comes to Samaritans. They're completely closed off in that regard. There are also traditions around, they keep different scriptures and different versions of the Torah than we do. But I can't tell you too much in depth because I'm not a Samaritan, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, the Samaritans are...
Do the Ethiopian Jews have things like that, or are they mostly mainstream?
It depends. Like, it's worth noting that these divisions are not always set in stone. And in Israel, the divisions are a lot
looser, from what I can tell. Also worth noting, like, the vast majority of Ethiopian Jews live in Israel. So
yeah, they all got
what was that?
airlifted out by the Israeli government, didn't
Yep. And unfortunately, they are also a discriminated against group. That's another aspect.
I'm aware of that too.
That's another aspect of Israeli politics that's just, oh god, it's just such a landmine. So let's talk about happier things.
Okay, so here's a good one. You said that biblical literalism is not a large trend in Judaism. You can't speak for everyone, of course.
Look,
but
one quick note. Biblical literalism is prominent among Orthodox Jews, which is part of why I ended up kind of struggling to say nice things about them. Because like 2/3 of American Jews vote left, and about 4/5 of Orthodox Jews vote right. So there's a lot of anyway. Okay, so please go back to the actual question.
So we talked about Passover last video, and I don't know if you're aware, but Passover and there's no evidence of Jews being slaves in Egypt.
Yeah, I mean, like,
and I actually looked this up because I was like, yeah, I'm pretty sure that didn't happen historically.
I mean,
and from what I looked up, it was a story that came from the northern tribes of Judah, who were once an Egyptian puppet state.
That sounds, I've never heard that, and that sounds a lot like one of those historians' theories. That probably has something to it, but I don't...
So I'm just asking, how do you square the circle with there not being historical evidence of a very major, well, not major, but a big portion of a big thing in your religion literally not being true?
Well, I mean, first of all, we don't.
I mean, your reconstruction.
Hold on.
Your reconstruction is so you're gonna.
Speaking as not as a Jew, but as a historian, that's not actually a good way to approach history. Because that is ultimately a theory, and so is that there was a period of slavery in Egypt. But there's a lot of there are details in the account that only really square with actual life in Israel, like in Egypt. Like the 10 plagues, the vast majority of them tie really, really closely to stuff that happens to the river Nile, that which in ways that kind of imply somebody who was writing that up knew and was there. And there are other parts that don't make any sense, and there are other parts that are just pop culture. Like they know a lot of traditions show Jews building pyramids, and that's wrong on a bunch of things. That did not happen.
Oh, but, we absolutely know that one.
But it probably did not happen like that. But there's definitely it's not good. It isn't good history to just say definitively there is no basis to it, and that the only basis is in something several steps away.
Well, from the article I read,
the article
mentioned things.
Keep in mind, and that
okay, the article I looked at, I admit that the article I looked at, I googled it. It was the first result. It was from a Jewish organization, and they were talking to a history professor, and it was talking about things like the way stops that they specifically mentioned weren't inhabited at the time they were mentioned, traveled through, but they were inhabited at the time that that part of the Talmud was written down.
The thing about the actual biblical account is that it was an oral tradition before it was written down. Like, we know the Torah was traditionally sung because there's something called Torah tropes, and if you go to a service and watch them break out the Torah, they literally sing it. We still write into a lot of when people go up to read Torah during bar mitzvahs and bat mitzvahs, they give them tropes. They give them basically musical patterns, and that's how that works. So while oral histories actually have a way better reputation for historical accuracy than people tend to think, that's another discussion that I can bring up. But we know that the Torah was recorded at a different time than the stories that go into it were either invented or originated or whatever. So it is not when it comes.
Yeah, that's why I mentioned.
Yeah, exactly.
That's why I mentioned the article I read said this particular, like there were several kingdoms in Judea. The northernmost kingdom had this particular bit, and I believe the article said when they were writing the Torah, the Egyptian control of the area had gone. Like there was a point where Judea was controlled by Egypt. We know that historically.
I mean, oh yeah, it's.
And then this.
Okay, like.
Yeah.
I mean, okay. How about this? Yes, it was, but honestly, I would have to, unless the web browser you're opening up is going to go straight to this article. Like,
I'll link you the article. Yeah, let's.
This is something that's.
Let's not rabbi this and let's argue when we both have the same sources. Okay. So I.
But yeah, it.
Okay, so let's start from the basis that Passover, the tradition of the Exodus and Passover may not strictly be.
Well, not it is that the Bible
historical. I guess. I mean, I don't know. I'm approaching this through a Christian lens, and that's sort of, even though I'm not Christian, because Christianity is the religion I'm most familiar with.
It's worth noting that
I have a lot of trouble with this fucking box because it keeps knocking me back. You get near it, it knocks you back. You have to approach it from weird lines of sight.
I could not find a way to tie that to make a good joke that relating that to our discussion, so pretend I did. But this is one of those things that's really hard to debate because ultimately there is no evidence to get for, but there's also no evidence against. And you can cite things back and forth, and there's stuff that I could bring up. But long story short, the Torah is heavily allegorical, and a big part of Kabbalah and how it's supposed to be, how it works, is that the Bible is regarded as a blueprint as much as it is an actual collection of stories and laws. And by consulting and understanding that blueprint, you gain the ability to understand the nature of reality and form a close connection with God. And it's one of those things I think I.
So it's some, not Da Vinci, some Bible code stuff?
Look, okay, so actually, you wanted to talk about golems. So this is actually a really good segue. So.
Okay, let's talk about golems. I know the story of the Golem of Prague, and I know a couple golem legends. The one I'm most familiar with is you write life on the golem's forehead and it comes to life, and then if you want to kill the golem because it turns evil, which they sometimes do, you just erase part of the word life and it turns into death.
First of all, it's worth noting that how do I put this? So the way that the Rabbi of Prague was supposed to be able to actually do this was through deep understanding of the ways of using Kabbalah, and the reason you learn Kabbalah. I'm gonna butcher the. I think it's Aramaic and not even Hebrew, but I don't. The difference and interplay of Aramaic and Hebrew is another thing to go on into Sunday. But the idea behind it is that you're growing closer to God and closer to understanding of God's creation. But as you get that close to understanding God's creation, you start getting ideas of how to manipulate it. And you don't particularly want to because you know you're imperfect. But in theory, at least, according to the practice, you gain the ability to do so. So what was going on with the golem from a sort of, maybe not theological, but um, technical position, I guess, is
told us you're in close proximity to a known Phoenician agent named Tarnis.
trying to. It's hard for me. Okay, so when you create the golem, you are creating life. It is a deliberate. You are doing so by emulating the actions of God. And since you know and understand how God did this in abstract, you can create a lesser version. Except doing so is inherently kind of blasphemous because you are kind of usurping God's domain. It's not something like it's something I can't remember. I can't believe I keep forgetting this. But Judaism is the kind of a religion that the Talmud has a billion different, very extreme sometimes, restrictions on what your behavior, and there's an override built into it. And specifically, if the domains, if following Talmudic behavior puts a human life in danger, then that actions taken to save that life are more religiously correct than following any of those restrictions. And
Yes, I'm familiar with that because I'm familiar with um Holocaust survivor stories who talk about eating pork because that's all they could get. And it's like, yeah, eating pork is trafe, is bad, but so is dying, and you'd rather break one law than die.
Yeah, and doing so it's the sort of, well, we've gone through this sort of thing a lot in the past. The Holocaust wasn't even the first attempt at genocide we survived, or the second or third, just one of the biggest. But okay, so in a lighter perspective, I once read an account of a Jewish community in New York in the 1900s, where one day they had a water pump for the whole community, and Friday morning it broke, and they could not repair it by Friday evening when the sun went down, the day of the Sabbath. And that would have left the community without water, which is not a great thing. So what happened is that a few local notables went out into the street, found a random non-Jewish, Gentile passerby, and said, "Hey, can you touch this pump?" And he went over and he touched the pump handle, and they said, "Oh, don't touch this pump, you're in danger." And they ushered him away, and they fixed the pump handle, and they had water. So,
I'm gonna say something. I have always kind of laughed at Judaism because it is essentially rules lawyering
my
God.
children have defeated.
Yes, it is the rules lawyering God.
This is a religion where as part of one of the justifications for this, when it came to Sodom and Gomorrah, Abraham moved the goalposts on God's requirements to save people from there like 5 times, bargaining him down as he tried to get somebody who wasn't horrible out of the city. He only found a couple people ultimately, but he did it. So yeah, when it comes to, if God is letting you get away with logical fallacy, he's not exactly objecting to you having an argument. But yeah,
I play D&D, so I'm just sitting here like God has rules as written, and you're sitting there lawyering him. Well, it says the 2 poles. Sorry, I apologize. I put on the accent. It says that 2 poles are worth more than a ladder, so I buy a ladder and I cut it in half, and I have 2 poles.
Okay, maybe that goes against kind of the spirit, and I'm not sure that they'd go that far. But this isn't the level of D&D manipulation. Like, the whole thing about the Golem of Prague is that you can do it by following in God's footsteps, manipulating the nature of reality. But it's not a good thing. It's something that's to be done when it's necessary.
Because you don't have the wisdom of God.
Which is why Golem, yes.
And even God's creation itself was imperfect.
And,
human beings are imperfect.
God's image, but not in God's copy. And the reason why in legend these golems tend to go rogue is that We can't do it. We're just not even the wisest of rabbis can match the wisdom of God. So, and it's not universal that golems horribly mutilate everybody or anything, but it's
Golems are really, they remind me of all those Asimov stories about robots.
Golems are like computer programs. They're actually extremely stupid. And if you give them bad instructions, they'll mess up. But unlike computers, instead of crashing or glitching out, if you give them bad instructions, they might kill people.
Well, computer programs might do that too.
Not like your desktop isn't going to get up and like try to crush your face.
That's true. We have like 30 seconds, so we'll probably discuss this again next time. I actually had fun. I enjoy talking about this sort of thing. I'm a big knowledge buff.
And,
so
I'll see if I can actually get, and I'll be ready for.
I will link you that article that I found to get your opinion on it.
Post it in the thread, and post a link to it in the thread and tell people what it is, so people can argue it over it there too.
Our own little rabbinical
on that note,
covenant.
see ya.
Our own little rabbinical meetup. See ya.